have a packet, a handout. You didn't get one, did you? All right, I'll hand that out. Also, as a note, there's plenty of food.
Back in 1861, when the War of Northern Aggression started out, our ancestors come together to take back our country. And for what they wore is what I am wearing tonight. I am in total full turnout gear as what my ancestor wore back in 1861 when he joined up with the 18th Alabama, Company H, down in Troy, Alabama. And while he was stationed there and everything else, he was issued a rifle. He brought one from his house that he brought with him. But once he got to the armory and got enlisted, they issued him an 1853 Enfield rifle, which I have one that's a replicate. And I also have one that was originally carried by a Confederate soldier, what's left of it, during the Civil War. I had a customer up in Tennessee of mine that brought it to me. He didn't have no kids and everything else, and he said he did not know what to do with it. And he wondered if I would like to have it. That was a no-brainer, of course. And if you look at it, when you get time and everything else, you can come down here and look at the barrel and see how much it was fired, that it had wore in 3 places down the barrel thin from being shot so much during the War of Northern Aggression. But the pattern 1853 Enfield rifle was developed by William Puckett. It's a 39-inch barrel with 3 grooves, and it is rifled at a 1 in 78 rifle twist. It is fastened to the stock with 3 metal bands, so that the rifle was often called the 3-bander. And it fired either the round ball or the mini balls. I brought some, but I left them out in the truck. I meant to bring them in because in a packet that they carried their ammunition in, they carried 40 rounds. And if you could just feel how heavy 10 rounds of just the lead itself is, not including the powder and everything else, you will be totally amazed on how heavy all this gear is when you go into battle. But it fires at 850 to 900 feet per second with 70 grains of powder. The reason they had at such low muzzle velocity was they didn't want to kill the man. They wanted to shoot the man, wound him, and so that somebody else would have to carry him back. So if you shot somebody and you killed them, they left them standing. You only took 1 man off the battlefield. But if you shot and wounded him, then you would take 2 to 3 people off of the battlefield to get him carried back to the back to be attended to. In 1861, the Confederacy paid $20 for each one of them that they got from Britain. The Enfield rifle was also used by the Northerners, which was the most popular gun during the War of Northern Aggression that was ever used. And it was widely used by the infantry during the war. The Confederates imported more Enfield rifles through gun runners and private contractors. Altogether, they brought in 900,000 1853 Enfields was imported. And they were used in every battle from Shiloh in 1862 all the way to Palmetto's Ranch in 1865, which was the last battle. The pattern 1861 Enfield is a mustoon. Do y'all know the difference between a mustoon and a musket? The mustoon is not rifled. It is a smoothbore. That's the only difference that there was between a mustoon and a musket. Is mustoons or smoothbores, where muskets are rifled. They were the same, pretty much the same thing, just a shorter version of the 1853 Enfields, but they only had two bands that held them to the stock with a 24-inch barrel, but they had a little bit more. They had a 1,000 to 1,100 surface feet per second on that. The second most used rifle in the Confederate was the Fayetteville rifle. The Fayetteville was also a two-bander, and it was produced by the Confederate States Arsenal in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The machinery which made them was captured from the United States Arsenal at Harper's Valley, Virginia, where they took over and started making the Fayetteville rifles. The weapons were also 58 caliber, and from early 1862 until captured and destroyed the arsenal by the Union forces under General W.T. Sherman on March 11, 1865. So they were only in the coexistent for about a little over 4 years. And it looked a whole lot like the 1861 mustoon. Now, the next one was what was known as the Mississippi rifles, which, if you go through the brochure, this is what the Mississippi rifle looked like. It was a two-bander and everything else. The only difference on this one was it was rifled, and they started out being 53 calibers, and when the war went into it, they would carry them back and they had them rebored and opened up the 58 caliber, and they were originally flintlocked and was transferred over to being percussion lock. Each one of the rifles themselves costed $16 to make. The Mississippi, in 1855, the Mississippi rifle changed to 58 caliber so that they could have used the standard ammunition which was issued on North and South. Originally, it did not have a place to put a bayonet, and was later added a little notch to them so that they could put a sword bayonet to them. The first Mississippi rifles used a V-notch instead of a leaf spring for sights. So they wasn't as accurate and didn't have the windage and everything else as what the newer rifles did. But the Mississippi rifle had, once they had the leaf springs on them, they were accurate up from 100 to 500 yards with a muzzle velocity of 1,000 to 1,200 feet with a effective range of 2,000 yards. So it was what I would consider every Southerner's, when they went to war, that's probably what they carried with them, was one of the Mississippi rifles from where they were originally flintlocked and then converted over during the war. On pistols and everything else, there were several different types of pistols that the Confederate carried. The first one we're going to talk about is the Colt 1851 Navy revolver, which, oh yeah, I got this one right there on my side. It's a 36 six-shot, and it shot 20 grains of powder with a 36 caliber ball. It had a muzzle velocity of 840 feet per second and an efficiency range of 50 yards. So this was mainly used for close-up. Later on, Colt invented the 1860 Army, which is a 44 caliber. It's on the same frame and everything else. The only difference is that they have cut a notch out to make it to where it will hold the 44 caliber instead of the 36. This is one of the main ones that Forrest mainly used. And the only problem with it was while you're on the horse and in a battle and you're going to change out the cylinder, you had to pop out the spring. You had to pull it apart, take the cylinder out while all of this on the horse while it's a galloping, and try and hold it and put it all back together while the horse never stops. So I mean, your horse had to do a lot on his own. You used a lot of knee controls and everything else because it's too busy using both of your hands to change out the cylinders on the weapons and everything else. But they were mainly used by, the 36 was used by the Navy, where the 44s were mainly used by the cavalry and not infantry, but the cannon crew, the artillery. So, and not long after that, Remington come along with their answer to it, which the biggest problems with the Colt pistols was that after so many shots, the frame would stretch. Well, Remington come up and said, well, we will do this. This is the Remington Army and Navy. Like again, the Navy's 36 caliber, the Army's 44 caliber. It's a little easier while on the horse, you just out and right back in. So you could do a whole lot of changing a whole lot faster, and you didn't have to use, try to hold on to all them parts as the horse was galloping. I know they said that Forrest, when he went into battle, he had a minimum of 8 pistols on his side and 2 cartridge belts full of cylinders that he would change out during a battle. But the Remington fixed the stretching problem by putting a bridge across the top to where it would not stretch, and they shot 20 grains of powder in a 44 round ball, and they had a velocity of up to 1,286 feet per second with a range of about 75 yards. So these actually got a little bit more accurate than what the Navy's did. One of the next ones, which wasn't a whole lot of them carried during the Civil War, except for in Texas. Them Texas boys are something special. This is called a Colt Walker. And it's a 44 caliber, and it still carries the thing of being the most powerful handgun ever produced. It shoots anywhere from 60 to 80 grains of powder, and shoots a 44 round ball. The biggest problem that they had with the Colts, or the walking Colts, was that they would overpower them and it would blow the cylinder up while they were firing them. And the only problem I would disagree with them is this thing weighs 4.5 pounds empty. So by the time you put lead and powder in, it's up about 5 pounds or a little over 5 pounds. So if you had to take this into battle and everything else, I think I'd rather shoot the rifle than I had this. Because that right there ain't nothing but a hand cannon. But it was designed for Samuel Walker, which was a Texas Ranger back there, the Mexican-American War. And it was named after him, and it's got an engraving of him in the Mexican-American War that Whitney had him engrave on it due to what he said happened during that battle. So now we're going to move on to some little things that are a little less uncommon weapons. In the pamphlet you will see what's called a grape shot revolver. So my revolver is made out of 2 calibers. It was 42 and a 36. It was not made that many of them. I think altogether there was 2,900 of them made. They did not carry them because they carried an oddball ammunition from the 44s that everybody else carried throughout the war. But Dr. Lamat was the manufacturer of them, and he had General P.T. Beauregard to back him on building these. The special function of these is, if you turn over and look at the schematic of it, is that the pistol is an 8-shot. And in the center of it, it's a 20 gauge that shot buckshot. So it's a 20 gauge, one single shot of 20 gauge shotgun load and 8 shots of that. The biggest problem they had with it is when they fired the 20 gauge, that the spread off of it was so bad that it actually burnt their hands, and they quit using them because of all the burns and everything that they would receive from firing them. They shot 20 grains of powder, of black powder, on the rifle side, and it had a velocity of 620 feet per second with an efficient range of 40 to 100 yards. 40 yards being the 20 gauge and 100 yards being the 42 caliber. Now we're going to move on to, everybody thinks that landmines is a relative new thing. Landmines have been around since the Civil War. They were called torpedoes, as they was known by, and largely used by the Confederate, originally by General Rains. These anti-personnel explosives were typically iron cased, rigged with a gunpowder and a fuse and a brass demolition cap. Rains first used the subterranean booby traps in 1862 and planted them all over the South. And the last ones that were found was found here back in the 1960s here in Alabama. They found some down around Tuscaloosa and everywhere else that was planted. So he planted them everywhere. But they during the when they first started doing them, Union General McClellan announced that they were barbaric, that they were nothing but devices of murder. And the biggest critic was Union General William T. Sherman, who lost several troops to the underground landmines during their march to the sea, described that the mines was not warfare but murder also. Sherman was reportedly forcing his Confederate prisoners to march ahead of his troops so that they would step on to them before his Union soldiers would do them, so that they would know where the mines were and everything else. And what does the sewing machine factories have in common with the Civil War on the Confederate side? Well, the Singer Naval Mine. One of the nephews of Isaac Singer, who was the original designer of the Singer sewing machine, left the northern side and joined up with some of the Confederates down here in the South and designed what's called the Singer Mine. It was a laid mooring contact mine, which when it was struck by the ship, it had a fuse on it that they had to go back and put a safety pin in it, because so many would go off as they were putting them into the rivers at the mouth of the Mississippi and coming up through Mobile and everything else, that while they were placing them, they would go off and they would kill the folks. So they ended up rigging it up, and there's a picture of the fuse that they used. It's a pressure fuse with a pin in it, so that when they did put them in place and everything else, that they would not go off. These were iron bodied and carried anywhere from 55 to 65 pounds of powder. You can imagine going to these reenactments where you see these cannons going off they use about a third of a pound of powder. Imagine what, 55 to 65 pounds of nothing but black powder, how big of an explosion it would make and what it would do to a ship. Let's see. E.C. Singer was also involved with the spare torpedo, which the H.L. Hunley used to sink the Houston Titanic. So for somebody that was a Yankee to come down to turn against his own country and come down here and help the Southerners, we sure do appreciate him, because without him, he could have gave this to the North, and the North could have used it against us. They also had rocket launchers. Like I said, a lot of things nowadays, everybody thinks it's all new, you know, all started back during World War I, II, and everything else, but no, it actually started way before that. The rocket launchers made a few appearances on battlegrounds. Confederate forces reportedly experimented with rockets on the dates, and they did look like, if you looked at the pictures, they looked like what we call fireworks on a stick. They would light them, drop them down in the tube, and they would go out and explode overhead and send out shrapnel and do damage to the people on the other side of them. But they wasn't accurate enough and everything else, and they decided after a while to quit using them because they started running low on gunpowder, and with the efficiency of them not being up to par, they needed the gunpowder to make the projectiles for the infields and everything else. And if you go to the very last page, this is the one that did not make it. The double barrel cannon. This is a dentist idea. So if you go to the dentist, ask him about it, because a dentist has done this. But the double barrel cannon concept dated back to 1842. But in 1862, a Georgia dentist raised money from the citizens of Athens, Georgia, to build a chain shot cannon for the cost of $350. The cost of one piece of the cannon featured on one side by the other side bore. Each one was a little over 3 inches in diameter and had a chain that was attached to each ball. And they were set off in a 3-degree angle. So they were thinking once it would go off, it'd go off simultaneously, and it would go out and straighten out the chain and wipe out a whole lot more people. Well, that wasn't the case. During the test fire, the chain stretched out because one side went off before the other. So it sent it oblonging down the course. And as it went down, the chain broke. And when the cannonball landed, it actually hit a widow's chimney and knocked it down. And the other one killed her cow. So that's one that never made it to be seen in combat and everything else. But is there anything on weapons so far that anybody has a question? Yes, sir.
Robert, on the cannon, for instance, is that in Athens? Where can one see that today?
It's still in Athens, Georgia.
Okay.
It's still, I think it's out there on their campus.
Okay. What about the rocket launcher example you've got here? Is that just a museum piece, or is that available somewhere to go look at?
There's one in the, I think North Carolina.
Okay.
And LeGreat or LeMat pistol, I've only seen one of them. And it was down at Fred's, down at Crooked Creek, and he just passed away.
Yeah.
But he has one of the very few last ones, and the only one I have ever seen, and actually got to look at it up close and everything, with it having the 12 gauge single shot in the center with 8 shots on the outside. So,
One in Arlen.
is there one in Muscle Shoals in Arlen? So So, I mean, I think,
How many of those times were made, just one?
just one. One made and one test fire. After the test fire, it was put up. So, well, I hope they would thin the barrel out so that they would explode on them and everything else.
What was the factory name of that Mississippi rifle that carried the sword bayonet?
That's the Mississippi rifle that carried the sword bayonet.
Bud Estes had one.
They actually welded a lug onto it to where they would attach a sword bayonet to it and everything else. Because originally this lug was not on them. Originally it came, and then when the war started and everything else, and they started training with bayonets, and everybody that was carrying a Mississippi rifle said, hey, we can't do bayonet training. So they ended up welding the lug onto it.
Well, I think that Bud had one, and they got a different name that carried that sword bayonet. I can't think, but it wasn't a whole lot of them made. Now, they use, they've got a smaller size nipple on them, so you have to have a different size cap for it. I don't know what happened. I guess the Tenbuck got his rifle. Huh? Something like that.
Yeah, that was a northern rifle after a northern platoon, is a New York platoon as a matter of fact. They were called SWA. It's ZAUCE or something like that, so
I looked at
it's
it
SWA.
one time and got a lot of stuff on it, gave a paperwork to him.
Right. There's a lot of controversy on whether or not that rifle actually made it into combat. But they did find one on a battlefield, which leads me to believe that, yes, they were used right there at the end of 1865.
They were used some, but they didn't like them, you know. So
Yes, sir.
many of them made.
Yes, sir, because,
You can look it up.
yeah, when they, like you said, they carried a different size nipple cap on them. So when they ran out of that size nipple caps, they couldn't just reach down and pick them up off the ground. They stood there and their gun was worthless. So there wasn't very many of them that I know. Like I said, I have read one report where one was found on a battleground. So that leads me to believe at least the unit used them one time in 1865. All right, I'm gonna finish up with, yes,
The grape shot revolver caused the burns?
because the 20 gauge on them had so much powder on them that when they fired off, they spread it out. The fire just wrapped around them, and they would set the cylinders off even though they were packed. If you did not have all 8 shots fired off on them, when you shot the 20 gauge first, all 8 shots chain fired along with because of the heat. So a lot of folks got burnt bad by hands. So, because I mean, just like on these right here, if you have what's called a jump fire, you know, where you fire off on one cylinder and then it starts setting them all off. These have nipple holes on the back and it blows the nipples off and the fire comes out all around your hand while it's like this. So that's another drawback to, sir?
I just asked why you greased that cylinder.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Once you pack them, yes, sir. So,
I tried at the time, I had some, I just, I don't know.
it will do it, and it will do it in a heartbeat. Cause
I sure had it off to the side, but it went off.
yes, sir. Cause I mean, if you look at the top of my fingers, I've had it do it more than once. I mean, the back of my fingers are so burnt from where my hands was around the pistol grip and everything else. When it jump fired, it literally just fried my fingers right there on the tips. So we got anything else on farms?
These modern reproductions, how many grains of powder do you load?
Same thing, 20 grains.
Still 20?
Yes, sir.
I've been loading 30.
Well, they shot 20 grains. The 44s are made to shoot 20 to 30 grains of powder. Yeah. The 36 calibers are made for 20 grains.
I'm all right shooting 30 and 40.
Yeah.
The walking coat
Walker, yeah.
shoots 60 to 80 grains.
My brother's got one of those.
And if y'all need to come up here and feel this
He
thing.
shot a varmint one time and he shot that thing in half.
Yes, sir.
I'd hate to be shot by that.
Yes, sir.
I don't tell you what kind of varmint. He wasn't too big though.
I think this went all the way up to, what was it, 1936 when they come out to with a 357
You know
Magnum.
what Augustus McCrae carried on Lonesome Dove?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Yes, sir. This was carried in a lot of movies. The Outlaw Josie Well carried one. Let's see, there's several.
And Pale Rider, he carried
Pale-
Remington. He carried Remington and Pale Rider.
Yes, sir.
When he killed John Russell, you know, he
Yeah.
was taking that cylinder out and putting another one in.
Yes, sir. So,
I watched Clint.
so.
What else you got, Robert? Talk to us.
Huh?
What else you got?
Well, I got a little story. And it just goes to show you don't trust your kin folks, especially when you're fighting on the opposite side. It says one day, and this is actually come out of the Confederate Veteran, Volume 1, Number 8, page 238. So this is what actually happened to a Confederate veteran. Of 1863, I was in camp and found a long-handled gourd about the size of a man's head and out which material as I could command to cover it and dressed it with hair from a beef tail. Until after a short distance it resembled somewhat a man's head. Before it was perfect, I was detailed to go on outpost duty and take my mask gourd with me. Intended to give it a finished touch. At this date, the picket of the two contending armies would at times discover and hail each other, exchanging newspapers, swapping coffee or tobacco, or vice versa. Passing a few non-friendly words, then each go on his own way back to where he come from. On this date, I was stationed before a fallen tree near the edge of the river swamp. About an hour later, I had taken my position. I saw a bluecoat sneaking around, gliding along through the undergrowth of the swamp. And when he got within 100 yards of me, I hailed him with, "Hello, Yank, who you looking for?" He right behind a tree and answered, "Looking for you, Johnny Reb. Have you got any tobacco to trade for coffee?" I replied, "I have, but we have not conversated long enough." So I discovered that the Yankee was somewhat nervous as I watched him closely. Enough matter to us had made it hostile demonstrations. Suddenly he raised his gun to his face, and just as sudden I ducked behind the log. And now I felt that both of us could not get away alive, and determined to give my work the first chance. After a few moments, I thought of my mask gourd and placed my hat upon it and raised it very slowly above the log to where it appeared as I was peeking over it. As it reached the top of the log, I heard his rifle go off, and bang, he had shot my gourd head right in the hat. He said, the mini ball pierced the gourd and fell right beside my head, remaining perfectly quiet, feeling assured that he would soon come and reveal that my dead body of my tobacco. In a short time, I heard him coming, and the voice inside of my head whispers to me, now is your time." But something else whispered, "Don't kill him. It would be murder. Take him prisoner." I knew that his gun was empty and that I had every advantage on him. So I raised up and presented to him my breast as I cocked my rifle. I never beheld such a look of surprise. He stood within 10 feet of me, motionless and seemed breathless. I ordered him to drop his gun, come around to my side of the log, and take a seat on the ground. He obeyed without hesitation, and when he was seated, I pointed at the gourd. He stared at the gourd, then at me, and seeing me smile, he remarked, "Well, I'll be." After a few minutes reflecting, he began speaking. "You have out-yanked me, Johnny, but I hope you will not let me be sent to Andersonville." I inquired his name and residency. When he informed me, John Hale of Columbia, Ohio, I asked him was he related to any that lived in Texas? And he replied that his uncle moved from Ohio to Texas about 20 years before, and when last heard from was living in Leesburg. I felt interested and inquired what he knew about his uncle's family. He mentioned his name of the children, and among them George Hale, about his age, who was his favorite cousin and playmate when they were boys in Ohio growing up. Pale and trembling, he exclaimed, "Oh my God, can this be true?" and wept like a child. I then told him that he was free to exchange because he had figured out that I am his cousin. I kept his gun and sent him on his way, and after the war was over, he moved to Texas, right next door to me. So, for somebody that had moved away for 20 years, never met anybody, and then be sent out to a battlefield and meet up from Texas and Ohio and actually be kin, how amazing is that? But you got to remember, the Yankees shot first. I appreciate it. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. If not, feel free to come up here and look at them. Like I said, the original one is not a whole piece. It's very much of it ain't left of it. But you can see where the barrel has been fired so much that it is totally wore out. But, thank you.
Hmm.